It's January 14th, 2026. Welcome to yes2howwhat.com. This is a summation of today's video. This aside or pause in our discussion about order exists to clear up another critical confusion before moving into the mechanics of order and questions, because many people assume the IRS's existing records must be explained or undone first, and that assumption sabotages everything that follows. The IRS's history of past filings, Social Security number usage, and prior compliance is not proof of authority, jurisdiction, or obligation. It is an administrative presumption that should not be addressed until present authority is proven or refused. Order does not erase or deny history. It brackets it, forcing the system to justify its present actions and prevent past conduct from being treated as law. Here is a final cautionary video, then, that we should discuss before moving to the final parts of order, and that is with question sequence and how responses are structured. We need to pause and address the confusion that would otherwise sabotage what would follow. At this point in the series, most people are thinking the same thing. What about my past filings? What about my usage of any numbers and records that exist? If that question isn't dealt with now, it will sit in the background and distort how everything else is heard. People assume that history equals proof. They assume it has to be explained, corrected, or undone. And because of that assumption, they misapply order before it ever has a chance to work. So this brief video exists to clear that out of the way. What follows is not a new tactic. It is not a workaround, and it is not a promise. It is an explanation of how the IRS uses history to operate by presumption. This is critical, and why addressing that history too early destroys position. Once this is understood, the rest of the series will make sense. Now listen carefully. As far as contending with the IRS history of you and your record, you don't try to fix or rebut the IRS's data first. You do not address prior filings, SSNs, or 1040s at the front end. You hold that history in abeyance while you force the IRS to prove present authority, jurisdiction, and obligation. Only after order is established or refused does the historical record become relevant, and even then, only in a limited way. The IRS's so-called record is not proof. It is an administrative inference engine built from prior filings, such as 1040s, W-2s, and 1099s, or from an SSN association, or from prior correspondence, from prior compliance, or from silence when notices were sent. That history does not prove jurisdiction. It does not prove obligation, and it does not prove present authority. It creates more presumption. Presumption allows the system to move unless it is interrupted properly. This is why you do not address the history first. If you start by saying things like, those filings were made under mistake, or I didn't understand the law then, or I revoked consent created by past filings, or those returns were filed under duress, then when these are said, you have already lost. Because at that moment, you have accepted the IRS's framing, admitted a relationship you're trying to now challenge, shifted the burden onto yourself, and converted presumption into narrative fact. You cured or fixed their defect for the IRS. That is why order exists. Order does not erase history. Order does not deny history. Order brackets history. Order says procedurally, before we talk about what you think I did in the past, you must establish your authority to act now, your jurisdiction over me now, and the law that creates an obligation now. This is not semantics. It is procedural priority. Until authority, jurisdiction, and obligation are established, past filings are irrelevant. SSNs are irrelevant, and prior compliance is irrelevant. Not morally, but procedurally. The IRS will often ignore order and proceed as if history alone is sufficient. When that happens, you do not rush to rebut the history. You let the record show that authority was requested, jurisdiction was requested, obligation was requested. None were established, and enforcement proceeded anyway. That is the exposure. Now, the history becomes part of the abuse, not the justification. History is only addressed after one of three things happens. A court with actual jurisdiction orders it released, an appeals body requires clarification, or you choose to engage at a higher risk stage knowingly. Even then, history is addressed narrowly, not emotionally, not globally, and not as a confession. And in many cases, it is never strategically addressed at all, because doing so adds nothing and concedes too much. Presumption feeds on history, your history. Order starves presumption by forcing present proof. You do not fight the past. You force the system to justify the present and its present actions. So to answer the question directly, yes, you wait until after order to address the record that the IRS already has based upon your history. And often you never address it at all, because the moment you do, you are no longer interrupting presumption. You are participating in it. Order is not about correcting history. It is about preventing history from being treated as law. That is the discipline. And as always, may truth reign supreme.